So Larry McCoy is a great friend of the Oceanside Library and the Oceanside community. Born in Indiana, went to the Indiana University, started his career at UPI in Chicago, went from UPI to ABC Radio to Radio Free Europe, and that was during, obviously was during the Cold War and also Vietnam. Bounced back to CBS News Radio, then back to Radio Free Europe. And usually when people bounce back and forth to institutions like Radio Free Europe, we assume that you're part of the CIA. So we'll ask you that later. Then back to CBS. He has been a reader at the Summer Gazebo Readings we're going into our 19th season. Like I said, I think he's read at least 10 or 11 times for us. Plus he's a regular on that Poetry Near and Far that I talk about. He has been delighting audiences here in Oceanside for well over a decade. And we are delighted that he is here with his new book, I Should Have Married My World History Teacher, Confessions of a Hoosier Class Clown. I cannot be more delighted to introduce Larry McCoy.
The only reason I came here is to report my circulation is down 29% too. I want to thank Tony for having me, and I want to praise this library. It's really well done. Thanks for being here. You can consider yourselves honorary Hoosiers for at least the next 6 hours. I have a lot of material here. No, I don't know the origin of the word Hoosier, though I've joked that people would say, who's your father? I don't know who's yours. Merriam-Webster tells us that the first known use of the word Hoosier was in 1826, 10 years after Indiana became a state. Other words first used in that year are chin music, funny bone, and bed sore. I had never been in New York until I flew here in 1964 to take a writing audition at ABC Radio News. They hired me, and not long after we moved here, one New York native asked if Indiana was on the way to Florida. I said no, but my answer should have been absolutely if you don't care how long it takes you to get there.
Excuse me, can I just move this a little because I can't see you?
That's a handsome young man.
I know.
What are you doing with him? I guess we should talk a little about the book, I Should Have Married My World History Teacher, Confessions of a Hoosier Class Clown. Look at that picture. Does that look like a young kid about to devote his entire life to behaving? Absolutely not. I grew up in Frankfort, county seat of Clinton County, farmland. One of the two major banks was and is the Farmers Bank. The population back in the 50s was 15,000. It's nearly 17,000 now. This is how the book begins. Thank you, Barbara. On my bike with no shirt on, a deep tan, arms at my side. I was pedaling at a good speed with no need to grip the handlebars, heading to the TPA Park in Frankfort, Indiana, to swim once again on a warm, great summer day. I was 16 and a prince. I thought I'd read some snippets from various parts of the book. You may fall asleep before I do. The art of milking. In the tales I've told over and over to my kids, grandkids, and friends, there's nothing I've probably exaggerated more than the hardships my family endured during the couple of years we lived on a farm with no electricity or running water. The farm was the one my dad, Levon McCoy, grew up on near Colfax. To give you some idea of where we are, Colfax is about 20 minutes from Purdue University. We moved to the farm after my grandfather died. I was 7 years old and my older brother Jim was about 10. Our chores included milking cows. They have to be milked twice a day. And I think Jim and I were assigned only to the evening shift. A cow we called Big Red scared the berries out of us. She kicked when her tits were touched. As I've grown old, I have tits of my own and appreciate why Big Red didn't want anyone squeezing hers. On the rare nights when Big Red didn't start kicking, neither Jim nor I had hands big and strong enough to squeeze more than a trickle of milk out of her. There aren't many articles written about successful milking techniques that exclude the touching, grabbing, and squeezing of tits. Or if there were, Jim and I hadn't read them. Dad would come home after work and hear that every cow except Big Red had been milked. He was not pleased that his two older sons showed no aptitude for handling simple farm chores or even basic courage. While in Dad's eyes we may have been sissies, we both desired to age slowly, maybe even living into our teens. Call the fire department. Although there was no running water on the farm, there was a sink where we kept a pan of water to wash things. One time, Mom decided to paint the wall under the sink and asked me to help. I was asked to hold a match while she did this task. Of course, something went wrong or I wouldn't be telling you about it. I probably, make that definitely, wasn't paying enough attention to where her head was as she moved her paintbrush back and forth and up and down. I did, and this is to be admired, pay attention when her hair caught fire. I don't recall whether I was the first to realize this, but Mom grabbed the pan of water in the sink and poured it over her flaming hair. Whether the paint job was ever finished is lost in McCoy family history. I am certain Mom never asked me to hold another match for her. She was a high school grad and a smart lady. Down, but thank God not out. I remember it as a sunny afternoon that was going to spoil all afternoons forever because I had killed my older brother. Jim and I got along fine most of the time, but on this day we had been in a scuffle. And when it was clear I was losing, I picked up a small block of wood and threw it. It hit Jim in the forehead, and down he went in the alley beside our house at 709 Alhambra Avenue, our home after leaving the farm. Not only was Jim down, he wasn't moving and wasn't responding to questions if he was okay. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to go into the house to tell Mom her second-born son had killed her firstborn. She raced out, and soon James Lee McCoy was on his feet and talking. He should have gone to Hollywood to have a career in the movies rather than preaching the gospel all those years in Missouri. Some nights, Jim and I entertained ourselves in bed with cracker fights. We stuffed a handful of soda crackers in our mouths, making sure not to slobber all over them too much before spraying white cracker bits at each other. There were always two winners in this competition because we were both laughing so hard, a condition linked to doing something you knew you shouldn't be doing. There is no need to characterize Mom's opinion of this messy frivolity. A diamond of our own. Jim loved baseball and was the architect and head groundskeeper of a diamond of our own in a field at the Clinton County Fairgrounds, which was only about 100 yards from our house. We played ball there nearly every day in the summer. Jim pounded a piece of plywood into the ground, and that was home plate. Another board went in the ground for the pitcher's mound. First base was a post on a fence surrounding the dirt track where harness races were held. Third base, we'll get to second base in a moment, was another board in the ground. Cows sometimes grazed in the field, and since there was no cleaning up after them, a dry cow patty was usually designated as second base. It was understood that a base runner or fielder didn't have to step on second, and obviously there was no sliding into it. Many times it was only three McCoy brothers, me, Jim, and Bob, our younger brother, playing a game we called scrub. We would each take a turn batting, fielding, and pitching. While we loved each other, that wasn't always apparent. When arguments broke out, the sport of baseball took on the elements of dodgeball and the high jump. Should one of us want to go home before everyone had a turn at bat, a ball might be thrown at the quitter, or even on special occasions a bat. I don't recall that these festivities ever produced injuries or grudges. We were all back out there the next day. I admired Jim for the work and passion he put into our diamond, and he could play. I can still see him running full speed in the outfield chasing a fly ball. He usually got there in time. I never asked for his autograph. I really should have. Grandma Alexander. My mom's mother, Charity Melissa Smith Alexander, lived down the street from us. Grandma did washing for a living. Even though she had a club foot, she drove a car. When I was about 10, we got in her 1939 Ford and went to Detroit, where three of her sons had moved during the Depression. She was nearly 70 years old when she made this trip of more than 260 miles. I don't know why she picked me to go with her and not Jim. Maybe it was because I've always been cuter, or she knew that the secondhand clothes I was wearing wouldn't attract undue attention. My memory is blank about the drive there, but alive with images after our arrival. My cousin, Tom Smith, who was several years older, took me to a soda fountain, or maybe it was a pool hall. Whatever it was, there was a window facing the street, and we were there only a few minutes before Tom screamed, "Let's go!" He went racing out the back door. He had spotted a truant officer, and the running was a sign this was not the first time Tom had decided he had better things to do than show up for school. Anytime you get away with something, it's exhilarating. Young folks and politicians know that. We ran, and when we realized we weren't going to be caught, laughed and laughed. If Grandma asked what I did all day with Tom, I'm sure my response did not include the run for my life. It was best that she not worry about me, but get her rest before the long drive home. On another trip with Grandma, she was driving through a small town outside of Frankfurt when I fell asleep against the passenger door. She wasn't going all that fast as she turned a corner, but the door sprung open, depositing me on the street. With a club foot, she wasn't all that swift. She was this day. She stopped the car, luckily there was no traffic, and hurried around to see if I was hurt. I was fine. My nap, however, was over. Falling on the pavement is a guaranteed way to ruin a nap. Dating. Anyone asleep yet? Dating. Dances were held regularly in the school cafeteria on Friday nights. After the dances, two couples frequently got in a car and drove out of town to a rest park, a grassy area where there were picnic tables and maybe a bathroom. There, the couples took turns reciting their favorite William Blake sonnets. That took only about 4 seconds. And next on the menu was necking. It's probably called something else now. A few days before one big dance, all my friends had dates except me. A bunch of us guys headed downtown to the Calder Hotel, where the amenities included payphones. With the door to a phone booth open and the guys laughing and teasing me, I started calling girls, all of whom told me they already had dates. When failure seemed inevitable, I dialed Marilyn Ham's number. Marilyn didn't have a date, and yes, she would like to go to the dance. When Larry, the Cary Grant look-alike, heard this, he said, "Gee, if I'd known that earlier, I wouldn't have called all those other girls." I can only hope Marilyn Ham doesn't remember that conversation. Oops. After a dance one night, my date and I and another couple headed to a rest park. After heavy resting, we started to leave. I had parked close to a wooden post, too close, and when I backed up, I heard a noise. Those with me heard a noise too. That was encouraging in a way because it meant we all had good hearing. I don't remember if I got out of the car to assess the situation, to study how to handle this predicament. Probably not. I simply put the car in reverse and gunned it. An astonishing decision. The wooden post was stuck underneath the left fender, and as I backed away, the fender bent. Oh, joy. Did I drop my friends off at their homes, go into my house, wake up Dad, tell him what had happened and how sorry I was? Of course not. Don't be silly. What kind of story would that be? Young boy driver admits to damaging father's car and says he feels terrible about it? Nope, I went to bed. Care to guess whose father had a few questions the next morning? Or to guess what the young culprit said when asked about the fender? He didn't know how that fender got damaged. No, sir. He came out of the dance and was that way. It's a complete mystery. Dad knew that was hogwash. I was a long way from confessing, and Dad put on his detective hat and went to Oy's drugstore, the teenage hangout. He probably loitered near the magazine rack, unnoticed but close enough to the soda fountain to hear the latest teen news. Monk McCoy had messed up his dad's car. I'm not sure how this news had spread, but it had. When Dad came home with the truth, I had no choice but to fess up. You will not be surprised to hear that it was some time before I was allowed to use the car again. After my grounding penalty was lifted and I asked for the car keys one night, Mom asked, "Are you going frontwards or backwards?" Yes, everyone, even a wonderful mom, is a comedian. Member of the band. I have trouble reading this. Although lacking any hidden musical skills, I played the sousaphone and enjoyed being in the high school band. One reason was Charlie Evanson. Sir Charles played trombone and had a habit of leaning back in his chair on the top riser in the band room. Every couple of months, band practice was interrupted by a racket. We all knew what it was. It was Charlie flat on his back on the floor. I don't recall him ever hurting himself, so it was something we all looked forward to. Every year, the band played at the high school gym when grade school kids showed off their tumbling and other athletic shortcomings. These exhibitions, I thought, were several rungs below agony. One blissful night, when the little punks were doing their imitations of somersaults, splits, and whatevers, Charlie and I began applauding to show our appreciation of this marvelous spectacle. The rest of the audience joined in. Oh, this was going to be neat. And Charlie and I did it again, and the audience joined in again. Soon we had a visitor, the band director, Mr. Long. He sat next to us, ending the applause and merriment. For some reason, I didn't take world history until my senior year, later than most kids. Being the oldest one in the class, I felt obligated to provide leadership. I would storm into the room after the bell rang and put on a raucous show of taking a seat. The teacher, Miss Edith Hinman, was an elegant woman, and when she asked questions of the class, I liked to take off my glasses, drape my handkerchief over my face, put the glasses back on, and then wave my arms vigorously. This is the adult version of this. I was joined in this bit of performance art by Jim Painter, who was a year behind me in school, 5 inches shorter, 15 pounds heavier, and a good half-inch thicker across the eyes, which were hidden by the worst-fitting pair of glasses ever sold. Alone, we were both reasonably intelligent. Together, we had the collective IQ of 6. Miss Hinman never called on either of us when we were entertaining ourselves like this. What a pity. I got A's on all the tests, but was given a C one grading period with a note explaining that my boisterous entrances and other forms of misbehavior had cost me. Halloween. Running was what Halloween was all about more than 70 years ago. I've never found anything that matches the breathless, gurgling joy of running away from something you shouldn't have done. Slinging a garbage can on a neighbor's porch, soaping a store window, or sticking a car horn. Halloween of 1952 was the best of all. The morning afterwards, there was a brief story on the front page of the Frankfurt Morning Times under the headline, "Vandals Let Down Streetlights." It wasn't no vandals, it was Jim Painter and me. While the report in the newspaper was factually correct about the streetlights being messed with, it captured none of the excitement of the deed. What we called a streetlight was just a light bulb at the top of a wooden pole with a metal replica of Buster Keaton's hat as a shade. A chain connected to the shade was held in place by a ring hooked into a latch on the light pole. It doesn't really matter who unhooked the first chain, although I've always thought it was Jim. What's important is the wonderful sensation it created. The light came plunging down and we ran like hell, convinced it was going to be smashed to pieces. We didn't know that the city fathers had planned it so there was less chain than pole, allowing for easy replacement of a faulty bulb. That word was bulb. The first light we liberated that night bounced and jangled to a halt about 3 feet above the ground. We scampered across the south side of town, letting down every second or third street light. We didn't hurt anyone, we didn't break anything, and frankly, it was 2 of the most exhilarating hours of my life. A year later, Jim and I were back in action. By this time, we were hanging around with guys who had wheels. 3 carloads of us had set out for a bit of cruising. Our usual tour took us through a residential area loaded with jack-o'-lanterns on the doorsteps. Someone dared someone else to run up and steal one, and he did, and then we all did, and then we drove around some more. 11 jackasses in 3 cars full of jack-o'-lanterns, and no one with the foggiest notion of what to do with them. Jim Painter to the rescue. "Let's dump them on old Howard Krause's porch," he said. A sensible suggestion, unless you were aware that old Howard Krause was our high school principal. Mr. Krause may have had the status and money to afford a house in one of the nicer neighborhoods, but he had an awfully small porch to handle 70 to 80 pounds of crushed pumpkin gracefully. Of the 11 future failures of America who participated in the night's adventures, I was the only one who got a view of the carnage at dawn. Mr. Howard Krause was one of the customers on my paper route. I had a good arm and prided myself on getting the paper on the porch, and this was not the morning for exceptions or anything suspicious. Catfish Hunter of the New York Yankees never fired a harder one than I did into that orange mess. I'm sure Mr. Krause didn't bother to try to extract the paper from the pumpkin or vice versa. Talent show. The high school kids put on a talent show called The Big Broadcast. I was the MC my senior year and did a pretty good job, I thought. Edith Hinman, the world history teacher who survived the indignities and noise Jim Painter and I created in her class, came up to me after one performance and handed me a note. "All is forgiven," Miss Hinman wrote. It's still the best compliment I ever got. All these years later, I think maybe I should have proposed to Miss Himner right then and there. Emmanuel Macron married his teacher, who was 24 years older, and he ended up being president of France. Hell, we're as good as the French, no? And after all the aggravation I caused my parents, they never came close to telling me all is forgiven. I never in my life had a better offer. If Miss Hinman and I had married, I wonder how long it would have been before she took back the all is forgiven note. 4 years, 4 days, 4 minutes? Radio days. Days after I graduated from high school, I was in Bloomington in southern Indiana, enrolled at Indiana University, and working a couple of nights a week stocking shelves at the great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. By my junior year, I had left the A&P and was working evenings and weekends at WBIW, a radio station in Bedford, about 20 miles from Bloomington. Bedford is famous for the limestone. If you've seen the Empire State Building, you've seen Bedford limestone. Let's all hope there are no recordings of my air work at WBIW. In addition to playing records and trying to be witty, I had to read the news. I was not good at this and knew it. You might say I was into S&M, stumbling and mumbling. Folks in broadcasting have a tradition of trying to break each other up on the air. I was an easy target. Another announcer at WBIW, Jerry Jorgensen, also a student at IU, was aware of this, and some days, instead of heading out the door when his shift was over, he stayed behind to see if he could get me to laugh while doing the news. After all, there was nothing funnier than hearing a story about a 2-car crash that injured 4 teenagers read by someone who was giggling. Jerry would go into an office with a large picture window next to the studio and wave his arms. One awful afternoon, Jerry stood, his name is Jerry, not Jerry, stood in the office window holding something over his head. Unable to resist, I glanced over and saw he had taken a record album cover with the picture of a woman in a low-cut dress and pasted Elvis Presley's face on it. Boom, I lost it. Dick Yoakum, who after a career in radio and TV news in Iowa became a professor, and a good one at Indiana University, told of a radio newsman who read the commercials in his newscasts and always placed the ad copy at a certain spot on the table. During one broadcast, the guy was aware a station employee was standing close to the table. When it was time for the commercial, he reached over to grab the copy and screamed. The employee had unzipped his pants and slipped his penis under the commercial copy. One wonders if station management asked for the particulars about what caused the scream. Sorry. I'd love to have seen that. Along about my junior year, I got a second job as a paid announcer at WFIU, IU's radio station. I knew little or nothing about classical music. I hadn't heard of 95.7% of the people whose names I was trying to pronounce. What kind of name is Shostakovich? Is that Russian for son of a bitch? Can you say that on the air? Who or what was Mazurka? Did he have a first name? Pietro, Stan the Man. Having no confidence I was up to this challenge only made it worse. From time to time, I was an off-camera announcer on a TV program produced by Indiana University. A guest one afternoon was Clem C. Bucher, a dean at the university. I ran the Clem and the C together and introduced the TV audience to someone named Clumsy Bucher. Mr. Bucher was seen on the TV screen wincing, and a faculty member of the radio TV department was soon on the phone to express his displeasure and disappointment in me. Join the crowd, buddy. Meeting Irene. That's Irene. An introduction to announcing class was my introduction to Irene Teresa Christoph, co-salutatorian of the class of 1956 of the Whiting, Indiana High School. At some point, I asked her out and we went to a drive-in movie, the perfect arena for the serious study of cinema. I probably didn't buy her popcorn because we were intent, well, I know I was, on nibbling on each other. Besides, it's likely I barely had enough money for the tickets. What movie was playing at the drive-in? We both remember it was The Men with Marlon Brando. That's the only thing either of us can tell you about the movie, that Marlon Brando was in it. We've joked in our old age about actually watching the movie sometime. After our first rather energetic outing, we began dating fairly regularly. Though being a louse, I stood her up once or twice or 3 times. We became serious, as people used to say, one summer when I was working at the A&P in Chicago, and she was a stenographer at Standard Oil of Indiana. One night, we went to a free concert by the Chicago Symphony in Grant Park, wrestling on the grass while listening to pictures at an exhibition by Mussorgsky. I wonder if as a kid he was called the Russian equivalent of Muggsy. On one of our dates, Irene missed the last train home. She called her dad, John Christoph, who came to get her. His first words to his future son-in-law were, "You lousy bum, keep your stinking hands off my daughter." "Not really. I wish I had met you under different circumstances," he said. An early-to-bed person, he had been asleep when Irene called. Most of our dates that summer and the next were long but not boring. Sometimes we went to the IV, the Italian village in Calumet City, Illinois, a town known for gambling and other illegal forms of entertainment. The IV had a rhythm and blues band, and we danced to the slow numbers, danced close together, so close you might have thought we were medical students making sure we knew where all the body parts were. One summer day in an achingly romantic scene while walking down Michigan Avenue, I said, "What do you say we get married next summer?" Irene took off running, and I didn't see her for weeks. Actually, she said, "Don't joke about something like that." The memoir ends with Irene and me getting married. You should not take that to mean that I think when I said I do, my life ended. For one thing, she's right here. Brave, tough woman, that Irene Christoph. Thank you. Can I have a drink now?
Anybody have any questions for Larry? All right.
Larry, which of the books that you wrote is your favorite and why?
Which?
Which of the books that you wrote is
I think this one. I think this one.
this one?
Because I'm old and I know I'm old. No, it's a serious comment. I mean, we left Indiana when, 1964? We've only been back there for funerals, and all my brothers are dead now. My sister's not got good health, so I realize that I'm old. And I think my high school class, 1955, produced Jim Alm, who was a general in the Air Force. I think he was in the Air Force Academy either the first or second year they started it. It produced Frank Starr, who was a Moscow correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. And it produced a guy who I knew as Denny Smith, but when he became the president of the University of Nebraska, he was L. Dennis Smith. It's in the book. Denny, the first Thanksgiving, my folks moved I spent my senior year in high school with my grandmother and took at least 10 years off her life. And my folks had moved to southern Indiana. And so all the guys from my high school class came back for Thanksgiving. And I had never got drunk before, and we got drunk. And I was supposed to spend 2 nights at Denny Smith's house, but I was only allowed to spend 1 night there because we were in his mother is a member of the John Birch Society. His mother, her SUV or her station wagon, we were in the back and throwing up on the street, and it was a great thing. Anyway, this guy went on to be a big scientist, but for 10 years he was the president of the University of Nebraska. So it was a pretty good class. But to answer your question, I think this is the one that I really like.
Anybody else?
Yes, did you keep a journal? Because you have a very good detail in your book.
It's all lies. What's wrong with you? No. But having said that...
Do you have a good memory?
That's interesting. I didn't get into this. There was a guy, there was a teacher in my high school class. I think he taught maybe physics. Anyway, he was missing a stub, right? And he gave demerits in class. I will answer your question eventually. And he would give demerits in class, and he'd hold up and say, "Barbara, that's 5 demerits." And Barbara would say, "You mean 4.5?" He said, "That's another 5." So I must have sent emails to 15 members of my class Was it Doc Belcher or was it Larry Farrell? And there was a division, and I may have it wrong in the book, but no. Having said that, as an adult, when we traveled, I always kept a notebook of some kind, including usually my wife would say $2.50 for a hamburger, you know, the important stuff.
How many times has your family heard these stories? Are these stories that you would tell on a regular basis, or some of these
Probably
brand
not
new
very
ones?
much. I mean, when writing about my older brother, I don't know why I mentioned this. My older brother and I, he died fairly recently. Anyway, we were really close. And my dad lost his job one time, and my mother was offered the job as running this drive-in restaurant, The Cupboard. And Jim and I would make milkshakes and all this, and my dad would come in on the weekends and tell us how to make milkshakes, and we, piss off. And when I was running things by Jim about working at the drive-in, there was a girl that worked there named Joan Sloan, who I say in the book is the prettiest girl I ever saw wearing glasses, and I hope no one talked her into getting contacts. Anyway, when I called Jim to ask him what he remembered about that, out of the blue, without me ever mentioning Joan Sloan, he mentioned Joan Sloan. So she was a winner, Yeah. But I don't think, not very often, yeah.
Was it satisfying or gratifying to write these stories about your childhood?
Yeah, I think so.
Y-
I think so. And matter of fact, my daughter, I thought I'd written the book, and my daughter Julie looked at it, and I had all kinds of redundancies, and I'd mention this, and then I'd jump there. So she helped me make it better.
Because you create that world so effectively. It's a joy to hear the
Thank you.
stories.
Thank you.
Were you a journalism major when you were at IU?
I got a degree in radio and TV, and then I went back and got a degree in English.
And what year did you start with the news again?
Um,
I think you said
1960? Probably 1960.
That's what your bio says.
Then it's probably wrong.
Yeah.
I have a comment and a question.
This is my son, Jack.
Is it okay if I just project? The lady who asked you about you taking notes, you said no, not really, and I know you mentioned the traveling, but every single day we went skiing, or we went to Hilton Head, or you went out west with Mom. You'd be writing everything.
Yeah, but not as I didn't write a note. Actually, I kept a diary for a year, and the diary would say like August 5th, had fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Obviously not with me.
Yeah,
The question is, are any of your books available for sale?
He beat me to the question.
If Tony would move out of the way, yeah. Thank everyone for coming.
All right. Thank you. Books are for sale in the back. I got to tell you, Larry, it's always a delight. It's always, if anybody is on the online, you note that I always hold Larry towards the end, and when I'm ready to
Thank you.
shut the thing off, I say, I know that Larry is coming, so that it makes the ending great. So thank you, everybody, for coming out. Larry, thank you so much. Great luck on the book.
I can take my nap now. Thank you. Thanks for asking. Thank you.
So we're going to give you the recording.
Okay.
Whatever you,
Okay.
if you want us to put it up on YouTube, we'll do that. If not,